There's a couple. So as the interview proceeds and continues, of course, I want everybody in the chat to know thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us. The likes, the shares, the comments, showing love to Dr. Martin for his time, giving your attention to us here, and being patient for the stream to start. I'll get your super chats here in just a bit, which you can super chat questions, comments. All I ask is that you're respectful. Dr. Martin, I want to ease our way into this subject because it is obviously a sensitive one for many people, but also it's something I think that a lot of people can use to really stop weaponizing, as we say, the Bible. So the first thing that comes to mind is Jesus is single, at least portrayed single. Forget what Dan Brown says. It seems like he's a single man. What is your studies on this? Is it odd to find that you have a Jewish rabbi like Jesus who's single? Have you, as a personal researcher into this and studying this historically and such, has that raised your eyebrows?
No, but it's because I know a lot more about ancient Judaism than most people do. A lot of people, when they say that, they're taking modern traditional ideas of Judaism. What we call Judaism today really came about more from the rabbis than it did from Jesus directly or from any of the prophets. Up until the year 200 or so, or sometime in the second century of our century, Judaism was not that different from the other countries around it. And so they had prophets, but other countries had prophets. Some of their prophets were single, and some of them taught against marriage and child rearing. It was not unusual in the ancient world. You have Greeks and Romans who did it. You have Jews who did it. You have Christians who did it. What changed was, for some reason, the rabbis, and starting around the year maybe 150 or 200, they started teaching that good Jews should be married and have children. They should procreate. Now, there's been a lot of debate about, or a lot of just assumptions about why this happened. Some people just said, well, Judaism has always been much more pro-family than non-Jewish cultures. Well, that's just not true. And all you have to do is read a ton of ancient Jewish pre-70, pre-200 texts, and they're not necessarily pro-family or pro-procreation. They're kind of like whatever's around them. And so, but what happens is, I think that, and this is just my theory, and this may be controversial, I think the rabbis changed their view precisely because Christian monasticism was becoming so powerfully important. It was attracting so many people. The monastic movement really starts off kind of in the second century. So we're talking around the year 150 or something like that. But it doesn't really get going strong until after the year 400. But around 200, the rabbis, I think, start noticing this. And so that's when you have the first kind of gatherings of rabbinic scholars. And they start interpreting the Jewish Bible to promote sex in the family, or procreation in the family. But actually, people will point out that they promoted even sex. They basically taught that every man and his wife should have sex every Friday evening. After the wife goes to the bath, of course. She goes to the Jewish bath, and then she comes home, and then they have sex. And this is kind of what the rabbis sort of promoted. But that didn't start happening until 150 years after Jesus' death. So if you want to understand what Jesus was talking about, you have to look at the Judaism of the year 50, not 150 or 200. And if you do that, you see, and I point a lot of this out in my books in several different places, that there's a reason that modern scholars and Christians kind of invented the myth of the pro-sex rabbis in Judaism of the ancient world. And then they transferred that to Jesus. But it's just not the case if you look at the historical sources. Things shifted in the second century is what I'm saying. And then the rabbis started promoting sex and procreation, and the Christians started to become even more anti-sex and anti-procreation after the year 200.
So, Dr. Martin, if there's any way I could get you to tilt your screen just to get you more into the picture, I might do this here
I don't know if
to
I
try
could.
and center us a little bit here.
My my iPad's on a stand, so
Is this okay, or is this?
that's fine with me if that's fine with you.
I'm good. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure we got more of you in the shot. So okay, sex and the single savior. All of these issues with sex, a lot of them come up when it comes to same-sex relations. A lot of people, especially when I was growing up, we would use the Bible, and the one sin among the whole list that Paul might list or whatnot, the one sin that was really the big no-no, right? It's almost like you favor the one, was that a man with a man or a woman with a woman. And so I wanted to dive into this because your book actually deals with these terms. So can you edge us into this whole topic and what you have discovered that is different from what we see today? Or how are you addressing this thing that Paul lists? And does Jesus agree with this? Like, where does Jesus fall into this category? Because as you well, I mean, I've seen lectures by you, you've read some of your works, and you're not a person who thinks everything we see in the Gospels is what Jesus actually said. It's you're very critical. So how do we understand what Jesus thought and what is Paul doing here?
Well, if you really want to get into the problems of what did Jesus do and think, you have to really dig down deep into the scholarship called the historical Jesus scholarship, which uses a bunch of different methods for trying to figure out what sources can we use to get material about Jesus of Nazareth, what methods do we use to winnow out the historical from the ahistorical? How do we decide then what we want to go back and attribute to the historical Jesus and to people who wrote after him? That's all very complicated. I mean, people spend their whole careers. And in fact, I have written on the historical Jesus in several different contexts, showing how I would do it. One of the chapters in the Sex and the Single Savior kind of goes through and talks about the different visions of this sort of thing in the Bible and early Christianity. And I have a section of that on, okay, what would we say if we were just doing the historical Jesus? And I come out with some conclusions. But it's all very complicated. So, but the person has to ask, okay, the other thing is I'm something of an amateur theologian also in Christianity. And I need to constantly point out that the source for Christian doctrine and Christian faith is not the historical Jesus. It's the Jesus of the Bible.
Right.
And so you can spend all your life hunting for the historical Jesus, but if that's what you're basing your faith on, then you're not being very orthodox from a Christian point of view.
Right.
I think that what's important to see, though, is that once you pull back the scope from the historical Jesus to early Christianity and its teachings, then you find a wide variety of views. You do find anti-family views and you find pro-family views among both Jews and Christians. And so, but Christianity became, I think Christianity became more and more ascetic, that is, controlling of both food and diet and sex and desire. I think it became more ascetic as time went on. And partly because they looked around, I think, and they said, hey, this works. You know, there are a lot of ordinary people out there who are attracted to this ascetic movement. And I've tried to explain that in various ways, that in the ancient world, sex was linked with procreation and procreation was linked with death. So if you want to escape the cycle of death in human experience, then one of the best ways to cut the cord is to stop having sex.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
And so that's the way people reasoned in the ancient world. And so it became, the avoidance of sex became very popular in both Christian and non-Christian movements. And it just happened in a period of time from the year, say, 200 until, well, all the way through until the Reformation. You really had to have Martin Luther and John Calvin come along before you had the Protestant redemption of sexuality that you got in the Reformation and modernity. So it was a movement that swept through the ancient world and the medieval world. And it's complicated and it takes a lot of historical explanation, but that's the short answer.